Good evening, Black people and all allies fighting for Black liberation, Black prosperity, and Black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. Students, teachers, and administrators are gearing up for one of the most heavily politicized school years in recent memory. Debates over the racial reckoning and this pandemic have turned America's classrooms into battlegrounds. Perhaps even more disturbing is that the classroom has become ground zero for the 2022 midterm elections, with politicians using students and teachers as political proxies for their agendas on race and public health. Some legislators have used their state's school systems as catalysts to pass legislation regarding vaccines, mask mandates, critical race theories, even anti-trans bills. To date, 10 states have adopted the CDC's recommendations requiring students, teachers, and visitors to wear masks at all times when indoors in a public school. Conversely, 8 states have enacted laws or issued executive orders prohibiting school districts from requiring masks in public schools. Lawmakers like Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida and Henry McMaster of South Carolina have gone so far as to threaten to withdraw funding from school districts requiring students to wear masks. As of July, 28 states have taken measures to restrict education on racism, bias, and the contributions of specific racial or ethnic groups to U.S. history. In many school districts, the politics of what is being called critical race theory and the pandemic have taken over school board, PTA, and teacher union meetings, all of which is leading teachers to wonder how they can actually cut through the politics and do their jobs. Joining us to discuss is American Federation of Teacher President Randi Weingarten. Randi, the classroom has become a battleground in the political culture wars, and that is everything from teaching our history, how do we keep our children safe, what kinds of student and expressions of gender identity will be allowed and how they will be able to be expressed. How are you and teachers thinking about this heavy politicization of teaching and schools?
So, number one, it shows you just how important education is. That the people that want to destabilize education will make it a battleground for 2022, or want to make whatever battlegrounds they have for 2022 and 2024 are actually zeroing in on how we help create safe spaces for our kids, how we help make sure that they have no honest history. So, there's an irony here, Charles, that it makes it absolutely clear how foundational education is to society. What I find really very troubling about this is 3 things. Number one, we're in a safety and health pandemic. Nobody wants the fact that the Delta variant has reared its head and that it is just roiling through communities, particularly unvaccinated communities, and kids are getting Delta in ways that they never got the other variants. But whether nobody wants it or not, the fact exists that it has happened. And if we really believe that reopening schools and education for children is as important as I hope we do, then we got to keep the education community safe. So we have to, have more people get vaccines. We have to have these kind of mask mandates, and we have to pay attention to, how to keep people safe. That's number one. Number two, we have an obligation as school teachers to teach honest history, and to actually prepare our kids for, the world that is in front of them, not the world that somebody thinks. And number three, and probably this is what I am most concerned about, when democracy is under attack, you see schools as battlegrounds. Schools should be center of learning. Schools should be a place where kids actually understand their lived experience and others, School should be a place where the values of what binds us together is more important than what drives us apart. And so when you see these attacks on a school board, on history, on public health, on not teaching about 1-6, that's when you know that our democracy is under attack. That's what troubles me more than anything else about these cultural wars, that and the health and safety issues.
So how do teachers do their jobs right now? You know, I have, my mother was a teacher, my brother's a teacher, my niece is a teacher. These are, you know, they don't get into this trying to fend off lawsuits. They don't get into this trying to fend off hostile parents outside of a school board meeting. They work long hours. There's no such thing as a 9 to 5 when you're a teacher. You're doing it all night. If people are calling you all hours of the night, you don't have real hours like that. They, you know, and they're not, they get, you know, decent salary, but they're not getting rich by becoming teachers. They do it because they love the profession. How do they navigate this situation where in some cases, you know, it is so hostile that people feel physically unsafe, and in other ways, there's lawsuits possibly hanging over your head if you say the wrong thing in the classroom?
So number one, teachers are actually the most unionized profession in the country, because teachers understand that together they can actually, that the unions have their back. Their local unions, the national unions. Is one of the reasons that I said in July that we would defend every single member who taught honest history, because teachers need to know that people have their back. Number two, the good news is, even though this is a very hot debate, and even though on social media, you know, it gets overly exaggerated and intense, and there have been real issues at school board meetings and real bullying and harassment, overwhelmingly, parents respect and love their kids' teachers, and that they know their kids' teachers are their lifeline. And so you don't, you know, so it's still, these antics are still the exception, not the rule, but they get a lot of attention. And frankly, I've been crisscrossing the nation on this back to school tour and this back to school campaign. We have, you know, basically 1,800 locals who have taken the grants and are really helping back to school for everyone. And this is what I believe. I believe if we can actually overcome the health and safety issues and get schools open safely and keep them open, then schools are going to be able to do what they always do in terms of creating a welcoming and safe environment for kids. And you're going to see some of this tension and angst start to dissipate because we're doing the work we have to do. This is a radical fringe that wants to undermine schooling and wants to, frankly, create chaos and confusion instead of actually unifying the country and actually making schools sacrosanct. And I bet with my members and teachers across the country, they are sheroes and they are heroes, and they are trying to do whatever they can to make a difference in the lives of kids. And they are amazing individuals, and we will back them up and have their back as they try to reopen schools and make a safe environment for kids.
Let's talk a little bit about trying to get the schools back open safely and for the long term. The early signs are not good. I mean, these are anecdotal signs from around the country, but in some of the states where, you know, indoor masking has been prohibited, we have seen some outbreaks. You know, there's a case in Florida where some teachers who were apparently not vaccinated have died in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
How do we, as a nation, get these schools back open safely if we have such chaos about masking and distancing in schools?
So, look, I don't want to sugarcoat what you just said. It's a real problem in Texas, in Florida. I'm looking at your chart, in Arizona. I mean, it is a problem in Louisiana too, but you got a governor who is really trying to help us. Louisiana had, it has really low vaccination rate. It had 6,000 kids who tested positive for COVID last week. So, so what's happening is that we are doing a full-on campaign to have universal masking in schools, at least, for the foreseeable future when Delta is raging, particularly since kids under 12 can't get the vaccine. And I've said to you, I know I've said this to you, I am an asthmatic. I understand that kids are not comfortable in masks. I'm not comfortable in a mask either. And it is better to teach and it's better to learn without a mask. But when we know that between vaccines and masks, that's the first and second best way to stop COVID or Delta transmission, then we have to do it. And I'm really glad that Secretary of Education Cardona today wrote a letter to the governors of Texas and Florida and said, and basically that they, weighed in and said, you are hurting all the people who are trying to reopen schools safely when you defy the CDC recommendations and guidance. And they also basically said to Ron DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, that if you attempt to take money out of the mouths of our kids, then the relief funds will be used to help. So I'm glad that the federal government weighed in on the part of our kids and their safety and our educators in the middle of this COVID surge. We have to, this is a whole of society response, and we need to have whole of society be there for us and with us.
Randi Weingarten, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it. Next on Prime, we'll talk about why race should be taught in the classroom. You're watching Prime on BNC.